Hi everyone, this is going to be a walkthrough of the pig hearts that we use in our lab for Bio 139 at BCTC. Now, what we see here, we have two separate hearts with different types of cuts. We have a few different types of cuts in our hearts in lab, so you may see some that even look a little bit differently from this, but we're still going to be able to see all of the same structures that I point out today. On some of the hearts that are cut one way as opposed to another way, you might have a better view of some of the structures. So come exam time, we will use the appropriate heart with the appropriate cuts to point at the structures that we want you to be able to identify. So these two hearts right now, both of them, you are seeing an anterior view of the hearts. So this is the part that faces the sternum and the part that faces the posterior part of the rib cage is facing downward against the blue mat underneath. So first one I'm going to walk through is this larger one on this side that's got the two parallel cuts. So let's go ahead and see what all we can view on this heart. Well, first of all, you have to be able to determine which part of the heart you're looking at. I told you that this was the anterior surface, but you will not be told that on an exam or a quiz or something like that. So how do you know what is the anterior side, posterior side, superior, inferior, whatever? Well, there's a few landmarks, and one of them is this point down here on one part of the heart. This is called the apex, and the apex usually points towards, they say towards the left hip. Not quite exactly, but generally points towards the left hip. But we could say that in general, the point, the apex of the heart is the inferior side. So it points downward when you are standing up. Now this is a pig heart, so some of those terms don't really make sense, but assuming that this was a human heart, the apex points towards the ground. It is inferior. And then on the other side, we have a lot of vessels coming out at the top of the heart. And the vessels that we can see from this side, these are all on the superior part of the heart. So superior vessels, inferior apex. Now, we know top and bottom, but how do we know front and back, left and right? Well, regardless of what type of cut your hearts have, you're always going to be able to see inside the heart. Now, when you open up the heart, one ventricle is going to be pretty thin. One ventricle is going to be much thicker. Well, the left ventricle is much thicker because it has to pump to the entire body, whereas the right ventricle only has to pump right next door to the lungs. So now I know this side of the heart is the left and this side of the heart is the right based on the thickness of the ventricular walls. And we'll see that a little bit better in just a little bit. But now I know top and bottom, left and right. And here it's very faint, but there is a blood vessel that runs down through this portion of the heart. It's surrounded by some fat, some other connective tissue. This is the coronary artery, and this separates, for the most part, the right and the left ventricles. So everything kind of diagonally in this direction is the right, and everything diagonally in this direction is left. So this is also on the front of the heart, the anterior side of the heart. So now I've oriented myself. I know all the directions of the heart. So what all can we be asked and what can we know from this particular heart? Well, when we look at the top of the heart, there are these little flaps. These are called the auricles. This is the left auricle. Remember, it's on the left side of the heart. And over here is the right auricle on the right side of the heart. These are different colors. That's not always the case, so don't pay any attention to the colors. But we have the left and the right auricle. Now, most of the time, you do not need to know the auricles on the actual hearts. You do on the models, but on the actual hearts, you don't. What you do need to know, though, is what is inside those auricles. So if I open this auricle up, you can see that it is hollow. And on the other side, this auricle, if I open it up, you can see that it is hollow. Well, the auricles are where the atria are found. So here, if you were to be asked, what chamber is this? You would say this is the left atrium, and this is the right atrium. The right auricle houses the right atrium. The left auricle houses the left atrium. So that's two things that you could be asked right away. Now, right below those, the atria are the receiving chambers. They pass blood into the ventricles, the ejecting chambers. So just below the atria, we find the ventricles. So here we saw just a moment ago when we were orienting ourselves, this is the right ventricle. I'm opening it up, and you can see here the wall of the right ventricle. It's pretty thick, but it's nothing compared to what we see on the left ventricle in a moment. So here is the right ventricle, and again, it is everything in this diagonal direction from the coronary artery. Now, here let's open up the left ventricle, and you can see just how much thicker the left ventricle is. So what can we be asked inside the ventricles? Well, it depends on the cut and what you can see. Here, we can see some chordae tendineae, these little strings right here. And they are attached to some muscle right here that is kind of a raised bump. And these chordae tendineae are attached to something called papillary muscle. Papillary muscle are raised bumps. Papal means nipple, so papillary is nipple-like or nipple-shaped muscle. And then the chordae tendineae come off of those, and on the other end, they attach to valves. And that's what this membrane is right here. This is a valve. Now, what valve are we looking at? Well, the way to identify valves is to see what are they in between. Well, what I'm doing right now is I've inserted my finger into the right atrium and pushed it through into the right ventricle. And you can see my fingertip there. But you can also see this membrane that is sticking to my finger as it comes through. Well, so that means this valve, this membrane, is between the right atrium and the right ventricle. And as long as you know your path of blood, you know between the right atrium and the right ventricle, blood passes through the tricuspid valve, or the right atrioventricular valve, right AV valve. So that's what we're seeing right here. Now, leaving the right ventricle, let's take a look at the outside of the heart. The outside of the heart, there's some vessels up here at the top, and the very front vessel that we see on the top of the heart in front. So superior anterior vessel, this large vessel right here, this is the pulmonary trunk. And if it were a little bit longer, it would immediately split into left and right pulmonary arteries. But this is the pulmonary trunk, and it is leaving the right ventricle. So if now I push my finger through the pulmonary trunk and look inside the right ventricle, this is going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze. So instead, I'm going to push the probe, the blunt end of the probe through, and we see that it comes out inside the right ventricle. Maybe if I can get a good view here. I believe you can see that. I'll wiggle it a little bit. So here, what we're seeing is the membrane, or the valve, sticking to the end of this probe. So that's the valve that's between the right ventricle and the pulmonary trunk. That is the pulmonary semilunar valve up here. Now let's go over to the left side. So here, again, this is the left atrium inside the left auricle. If I push my finger through and then look inside the left ventricle, we could see my finger there, and this membrane around it is the bicuspid valve, the mitral valve, the left AV or atrioventricular valve. And coming off of that, again, more of these strings, the chordae tendineae, and more of that papillary muscle that the chordae tendineae are attached to. Now, up at the top of the heart, this one, there's a lot more here than you need to know. There's a little bit of pericardium and other connective tissue here, but right behind the pulmonary trunk, the largest vessel in the body, this is the aorta. And we can see some vessels coming off of the aorta. On the heart, on the real heart, we do not need to know those. Just for orientation, this first vessel coming off of the aorta is the brachiocephalic. The next vessel coming off of the aorta is the left common carotid. Now, there would be another vessel coming off if we extended further. That would be the left subclavian. But you don't need to know those. All you need to know for here is the aorta, the large vessel. And this comes out of the left ventricle. It's a little hard to get my finger or even the probe through, but I'll give it a try just to see. I don't think it's going to happen. But if we were to look inside the left ventricle, going upward towards the aorta, in this cavity here, we would see another valve. We would not use this heart to show you that valve. We'll see it on another heart. But up inside here is where we would find the aortic semilunar valve. All right, so that's everything on the front surface, the anterior surface of the heart, and on the interior of the heart. But let's flip it over and look at the back, the posterior surface of this heart. And it looks like a mess. Don't let it scare you. Here, what you want to do is, again, know your path of blood. That will help identify everything. And then go through and see what's going in and coming out of each of those chambers. Well, right now I know this is the right atrium. I'm looking at the back of the heart, the posterior side of the heart. So now right is on the right, left is on the left. So if I stick my finger or a probe into the right atrium, it comes out of here. And it comes out, if I can find it, down here. So really, there's two things going into the right atrium here. Down here and up here. Both of these things go into the right atrium. What goes into the right atrium? Where does the right atrium collect blood from? Well, collects blood from the entire body. Here where my finger is, this is the superior vena cava, bringing blood back to the right atrium from the head and the shoulders and the arms. Down here where the probe is, this is the inferior vena cava, bringing blood back from everything in the body below the heart. Now go over to the left atrium, stick my fingers through, see where all they come out. There's one fingertip, and this probe also goes in. So I've got two things going into the left atrium. The one coming from the right side is coming from the right lung. The one coming from the left side is coming from the left lung. So these are pulmonary veins. This is the right pulmonary vein and the left pulmonary vein. Don't be afraid to stick your finger or a probe into a heart to figure out where things are going in and coming out. All right, so that's everything on this view of the heart. But now I'm going to push it to the side and we're going to look at another view of the heart where we can see some other structures a little bit better. let's orient ourselves. Again, there's the apex pointing down towards the ground. If this were a human's heart, when you stand up, this points down towards the ground. So this is inferior. The vessel's on top, superior. So top of the heart, bottom of the heart. When we look at the heart, there's that coronary artery separating right and left. So over here's right, over here's left. And lastly, see what's thicker. Well, here's the right ventricle, pretty thick. Here's the left ventricle, much thicker. So right, left, top, bottom, coronary artery front, back. All right? So what can we see here? We can see everything that we saw on the other plus some. Well, right here, the top vessel, right in front, this is the pulmonary trunk. Right behind it, the biggest vessel in the body, this is the aorta. You don't need to know the vessels coming off of it, remember. Here's that left auricle. So what's inside of here, this one is not dissected, but what is inside of here? The left atrium. Over here's the right auricle. What's inside of that? The right atrium. So we open the heart up. Here we can see the right ventricle and the left ventricle. And inside, we can see the chordae tendineae, all of those strings. Let me see if I can hold it open for you. These strings are the chordae tendineae. If you look at the little bumpy muscles that they're attached to, those are papillary muscle. And the flaps that they're attached to are the valves. So which valves do we see? I'm going to first push the probe into the pulmonary trunk and look to see inside the right atrium, into the right ventricle, my apologies. The membrane, when you stick something into the pulmonary trunk and it comes out in the right ventricle, that membrane is the pulmonary semilunar valve. Now, between the right atrium and the right ventricle. So if I were to go through the right ventricle into the right atrium, where my finger is right now, and pull it back, a little hard to see with the camera, but if we look up inside, this membrane right here, the membrane in between the right atrium and the right ventricle is the tricuspid valve, or the right AV valve. Now over here on the left side, let's open that up. If we go through the aorta into the left ventricle, now we can see that membrane pretty well. That membrane, again, is the valve between the left ventricle and the aorta. So that is the aortic semilunar valve. And then in between the left ventricle and the left atrium, this membrane right here, this membrane is the left AV valve, the mitral valve, the bicuspid valve. Flip the heart over, looking at the back, at the posterior side, orient ourselves. Here is the right atrium. What's going into the right atrium? Well, this vessel goes into the right atrium, or, see if I can get my finger to come through here, this vessel also goes into the right atrium. So this is coming from the top. This is the superior vena cava. Down here is coming from the bottom, so this is the inferior vena cava. Both of them go into the right atrium. Over on the left side, here's the left atrium. See if we can figure out what goes into the left atrium now. Here's one that goes into the left atrium. If I hook my finger around to see where does it come out, maybe. It's not quite going to, but there's this vessel right here. Let's see if I can get the probe to go through. There we go. So now the handle of the probe is coming from the left side into the left atrium, and the pointy end of the probe is coming from the right side into the left atrium. So these are both pulmonary veins. This is the right pulmonary vein and the left pulmonary vein. All right, so that is everything you need to know for the hearts that are in our lab that are dissected. These are the pig hearts. We do also have a cadaver heart. There will be another video for that, but it will show us the same features. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I hope you all got a lot out of that, and I will see you in the next video.